everybody. My name is Emily Kimani. I am your VP Operations and Finance, and today I am joined by Joanne Henry. Joanne Henry is the daughter of Violet King Henry. She has worked in environmental justice law, child abuse prevention, and trying to decrease the racial achievement gap. Joanne is currently working with U.S. cities on their plans for youth education and families, and she's currently married to a teacher and has a 13-year-old daughter in middle school. Hello, Joanne. Thank you so much for being here with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Emily, and it is a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm honored that you guys are honoring my mom so much. And so, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so I know I kind of gave you a little bit of a intro, but do you mind just introducing yourself a bit, your background, your work?
Sure. My mom and my dad had me in Newark, New Jersey. And at that point, my mom was working for the YMCA, YMYWCA, which we might, I don't know, touch on that work at some point in our conversation. But mainly I grew up in Chicago and in New York City. And I'm very much a New Yorker. That's a much longer conversation, what that can mean to different people, but I'm quite a New Yorker. Currently, my family and I live in Washington, D.C., which we really enjoy. We moved here from Atlanta, Georgia. So I've gotten to live in several parts of the United States. And even as a family, we've moved around a little bit. And what else is there to say? Pretty much in all of my careers, I've been focused on equity issues, particularly around race, but also around gender inequities and other, policies against immigrants, and just pretty much anything that is around injustices. And I can definitely say that I am my mother's daughter. I'm also my father's daughter, because my father did some of that work as well. But I'm very much my mother's daughter, and it feels an honor to continue that kind of work and be dedicated to it and be able to have careers where I feel like I'm working to, working towards justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so moving on to our first question, could you speak to your mother's, so Violet's experience as a student at the U of A, and what do you think that she would be doing or saying now?
Okay, thank you. So I guess I feel like the first thing I should say is that one of the additional tragedies of having lost my mom at a young age — I was only 16 when my mom died — is that, I don't know, I mean, you guys have all been 16 because you're college students. I think at that stage, we didn't talk a lot about her high school and college experiences. I was probably too busy wrapped up in mine. So from personal experience and from personally talking to my mom, I don't remember much about what she would have told me about her experience at University of Alberta. But what's amazing is that because I've met other people who know her, and I also have read, as some of you guys may have, quite a few things have been written about her, which I really appreciate. Over time, I have learned a bit about her time at University of Alberta. So I think one of the things that really stood out with me right off the bat is that in a class of 142 students, my mom was only one of 3 women who were actually in what's called, who was what was called the Faculty of Law. So you will understand how this works much better than I do, because I've never gone to school in Alberta, and I've never gone to university in Alberta. But from what I can understand, that's an undergraduate part of the study of working towards, I suppose, getting a law degree. So, and do I have that right? Let me stop right there. Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea of being one of only 3 women and the only Black person or woman in that area of study, I think just right there is really makes me pause and think about what that experience is like to be, in such a small number. And I have to say that until reading, I did always know that my mom was the first Black woman lawyer in all of Canada. I've always had newspaper articles about that. It's just always been an amazing thing to know about her and her history. I actually think I didn't always realize it. I think she was actually the first Black student at all to graduate. Let me There was one. Well, I was reading something else, and I think she was one of the only Black students to graduate from law school at all I mean, not just law school, to graduate from college in Alberta. I need to go back and check that, but that is something that I remember reading several times. And, even that, like, male or female, she was the first Black student to graduate from university in Alberta is really, that's really something. So I imagine her time was full of really interesting experiences. She was clearly very brave. She was clearly very able to adapt. Something that I've learned a lot about in my career is something called adaptive leadership, which is the kinds of leaders who, no matter what you're trying to do and no matter what you believe the right work is, being able to adapt to the circumstances and the realities of the environment you're working in or the people that you're working with. And she was clearly a brilliant adaptive leader. One thing I can say for sure, though, about her, and again, maybe this is something that's very common in University of Alberta sort of culture, but she was really busy. When I read about her, I just really was like, okay, she had a lot going on. So I'm just going to go over a couple of things that I've found about her. She was a member of something called the Blue Stocking Club. Is that still a thing? Have you ever heard of that, the Blue Stocking Club?
I've never heard about that club, no.
Yeah, it might have been something from then because it was a discussion group for women with an emphasis on history and public affairs. So I would assume that university culture at University of Alberta has evolved so that a distinct, discussions about history and public affairs is like what all students do. And that's not such a thing that women have to carve out their own space for. But it sounds like women felt the need to carve out their own space for that. So I thought that was fascinating. She was the vice president of the Students' Union, and she was the representative of the Students' Union to the National Federation of Canadian University Students. So I found that to be really interesting. And I have a couple more things about her time there, if it's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So in her undergraduate studies, she was selected as the class historian. And in 1952, she was the Alberta representative to the International Student Services Conference, which was held in Hamilton, Ontario. And I've seen pictures of that. Like I've seen pictures of the University of Alberta contingent, but also of some students from other schools in a newspaper article about it. And then this is really, this is another thing I didn't really realize until I started reading what's been written about her. Also in 1952, my mom was one of only 4 students to receive an executive A gold ring during Color Night. And apparently that's an annual event to celebrate students' contributions to University of Alberta. Is Color Night still a thing?
I haven't heard about it, so I don't know, but that's very interesting.
Many of these may be traditions that as university culture has evolved, just, either the names have changed or just maybe they weren't needed in the same way in other events. But what was really interesting, so she was one of 4 students to receive this executive A gold ring during Color Night. The other 3 students, it's very interesting who they were. That year, in her group of 4 students, one of them was, and I hope I pronounce his last name, Peter Lockheed, the future premier of Alberta.
Yeah.
Did I say his name correctly?
Yes, yeah.
Good. Ivan Head, who was an advisor to Pierre Trudeau, and Garth Friette, who is apparently a prominent Edmonton lawyer. So the 3 of them and my mom were in the same group. And it's just interesting because it says something about, well, certainly it signifies, how I'm sure University of Alberta has always been a place where a lot of really amazing leaders got their undergraduate education. And so that's really cool. And then, those particular people sound like they went on to do some really, really interesting and great things. So I just thought that was interesting. Yeah. Yep. So, and it says that she was the first Black person, male or female, to graduate law school in Alberta, and the only woman in her graduating class. So that was the first Black woman, the only woman in her whole graduating class, not, I don't think only Black woman. I think she was the only woman in her graduating class from law school. And she was the first Black person to graduate from law school in all of Alberta, male or female. And then the first Black woman to ever graduate from law school and get admitted to the bar in all of Canada.
Mm. Wow, that is amazing. And yeah, so she was the first Black Students Union executive, which is like totally amazing. And I think she's done wonders for like the Black community and the community in general at the U of A for paving those the way and those achievements. So that's very cool. So thanks for sharing that with me. I appreciate that. So moving on, can kind of switching gears a bit. So you have a lot of experience, obviously, working with youth and based on your past experiences. And so I've reached out to a few students to a few Black students across campus, and asking them about their experiences being a Black student in academia. And a lot of different students have had different experiences. Some have felt like, we don't get the same opportunities as our white peers, which I know you have some experience in, and some are frustrated by the lack of community. And some, are, embracing their identity and challenging these like white norms that are built into our university system. So what are your thoughts on this? What are your perspectives?
First of all, I love that you asked your fellow students, because it's so important when thinking about these issues to make sure that one is checking in with, those in the situation, those who are actually, students of color at your university. I think it's really important to ask those questions and to be able to take the temperature of what students are experiencing, so that as you talk about what the work of the student union is going to be or continues to be, and think about who you draw in as supports, you are actually solving the problems that people are actually having at the time. So I just applaud you guys on taking that approach. First of all, I'll say that one interesting thing about the way that my parents raised me is that because my mom was Canadian and my dad is from Trinidad, neither of them were raised in the United States. Certainly my mom had a lot of experiences being the only Black girl person. When you look at pictures of her from her childhood in her primary schools, or, in her early grades, there's this sea of white smiling girl faces, and then these two little Black faces, which is my mom and her younger sister. So they had a lot of experiences with being onlys. I had some experiences with being maybe not very often and only, but often one of only a very few in certain situations as I was growing up. But what was really interesting is that my parents made a very conscious decision, and they both told me about it later, to not raise me in a way where some of the things I experienced as a child, where they defined it for me as racism, they would just listen and try to help me think about how to solve those particular problems. But I was probably 13 years old, which in some ways as a Black person in the United States is like old, really old, before I made the connection, like, wait a minute, some of these things that are happening are only happening to us as Black people in my immediate life. And I think what that did was it means that I'm also the kind of person, and I don't know, I feel like my mom was also this kind of person who, in situations in my undergraduate university experience where there weren't many other or any other Black women doing certain things, I kind of went into it with it's something that I want to be part of. And to the degree I experienced resistance, and by then, of course, I was very aware of racism. If I experienced resistance, what I knew to do, or what I had learned to do, is to still engage the situation based on what the criteria for whatever the situation was. So I'm being, it's kind of hard to come up with specific examples when I think back to my college experience, because fortunately in my college experience, I went to university in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the US, and I didn't really have so many experiences where I could say, I know what I'm experiencing right now is because of my race. There were some, experiences like where we did political activism, where I felt like I stood out much more than some of my white counterparts when, we did protests and things like that. So I definitely experienced that. But from the university itself, or in the university setting, there was a lot of support, and there was a lot of structure for Black students. And so I benefited from that. But I guess when I go back to what you said, students are experiencing and how they kind of are aware of times that they might have fewer opportunities, for instance. I mean, that is a real reality that definitely continues to go today all over North America. And I think that my thoughts on it are, or what I would say to students is, for those really invested in maintaining the structures that have institutionalized racism in them, they really depend on us getting burned out, getting tired, feeling like it's not worth the effort, feeling like we're banging our heads against walls that are walls and not going to move, and kind of giving up. And sometimes for our own self-care and our own sanity, we do have to pause. Or there's some fights, we can't fight every battle. Like there's a lot of battles sometimes. And we can't, sometimes we just have to say, hey, you know what, this is not a hill I can die on for this issue. That said, if it's important to you as a student, or if it feels like an opportunity that you really want, when you hit one wall, or you hit one wall of no, or not for you, or we chose somebody else, keep looking for other avenues to the same or similar thing. Because that is what I definitely learned. And I learned that not just from where I think race was an issue, but where I had a dream of work that I wanted to do and nobody was doing that work. And so thank goodness I had coaches and guides who said, just get really clear about the work you want to do and talk to people who do related work. And often you will find what you need to find, either something completely different than what I was thinking of, but that was great, or people will realize because you're planting the seed that maybe there should be work doing what you want to do, and that work emerges. And that has happened to me in several of my careers. Mm-hmm. So what I would say to the students at University of Alberta who feel like they are definitely experiencing discrepancies in the opportunities they have, comparing themselves with white students, or who experience microaggressions or macroaggressions on a regular basis that are either very clearly about race, or underneath the surface it's pretty obvious it is, even if it's on the surface it's not. I would just say, stay focused on what you care about and what you want to achieve. Definitely, if it's like, I don't know I don't know if this happens in University of Alberta, but if it's a professor blocking you on something, or it's it's wanting to get into a program that Black students just don't get into, then it is maybe asking questions about how are these decisions made, and can you say more about why maybe I wasn't picked based on your criteria, because I feel like I fit the criteria. It's asking questions, and then it's looking for other opportunities to do what you care about.
Yeah. And I mean, you kind of already have answered this question, but if you want to expand a bit, like how do you go about addressing those issues, like from your experience?
Let's see. So for instance, do you mean in the you mean sort of more in the university setting, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see, what's a concrete example? A concrete example that I know is of, and this has happened to several of my friends when they were in college, in university, was where they felt like who was chosen to be, I don't know what they're called now. They were called graduate assistants then, I think, but like students who are in graduate school, who as part of their graduate school work, both part of their studies, but also they can earn either credit or money by assisting professors in grading undergraduate work or running undergraduate like subclasses for big lectures, like things like that. So do you guys have anything like that?
Yeah, they're called teaching assistants now.
Teaching assistants, okay. Mm-hmm. And I know from several of my friends when I was in college that there were times when the positions for teaching assistants never seemed to go to Black students, and where certain professors were particularly kind of known, and this is at different schools, this wasn't always at my school, this was at several different universities, were kind of known just not to really take seriously the applications of students, and maybe sometimes even be a bit hostile. And so in those cases, I mean, what my friends learned was really, there's two things, if I was going to boil it down, it's more complex probably than two things, but if there's two things that are really important to do, One is that there needs to be a paper trail. If you notice what you would consider like a complete absence of representation in the teaching assistants, it would be to then whoever, and I don't know at University of Alberta if it's going to the dean of the schools that hire the teaching assistants, if it's going to the head of the program. I don't know if it's going to an equity office, if there's an office of equity that's developed, but it's going to a couple of, and it is good sometimes to go to more than one, and say, this is what I feel like I notice, and I would either like it looked into, or when there's like clear evidence of it, I want to file like, an official complaint, because this affects my opportunities, it affects the school. And so creating some sort of a paper trail where somebody says something on record somewhere about a concern about either a particular teacher or program, that is really important. Let me pause that. And then the second thing that's really important is the other thing that I said. Whatever the opportunity represents, if there is another area in the school or another teaching assistant program or another professor that has had representation or has had, Black teaching assistants, then it's also going to either that professor or those teaching assistants and saying, this is what I feel like I'm experiencing. Do you have any advice for me? Like asking around to see what other people say about what they did or what they think is useful. And definitely asking professors who you feel like are allies, whatever the race of the professor, but asking professors who feel like allies what they think is a very valuable, it's a good, important step to take in solving this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for that, and thanks for sharing your thoughts and your experiences with me, as well as talking a bit about your mom. I really appreciate it. But those are all the questions and the time that we have today. So once again, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate being asked, and I didn't get to say these earrings were my mom's. So I just had
That's
to,
so cool.
I'm representing in several ways. So I had to do an earring representation also of my mom. She bought them in Africa, probably in the 70s. So just
I love that.
But thank you for having me. And I really look forward to getting to visit University of Alberta, hopefully in 2022, but certainly as soon as,
fingers crossed.
yeah.
Yeah.
So thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much.